The selection. Captain Jasmine Rodriguez had expected her first deep space research mission to be challenging. She hadn't expected to wake up in a cell that smelled like ozone and decay, surrounded by beings that defied human classification. "I don't suppose any of you know where we can file a complaint about the accommodation?" she asked, studying the crystalline walls of her prison. The only response was a low hum from the violet-skinned being floating in the corner, its translucent body pulsing with inner light. The other occupant, a towering figure covered in iridescent scales, merely clicked its mandibles in what might have been amusement or aggression. Jasmine had named it Prism in her head, for the way light fractured across its surface. 3 days had passed since the Kryvax Empire's ships had appeared beside her research vessel like ghosts emerging from cosmic mist. 3 days since they'd taken her from everything she knew, leaving her crew behind. The Empire was notorious for its species testing programs, but until now, they'd never ventured into human space. A sharp buzz filled the air as the cell's energy barrier flickered. 2 Kryvax guards entered, their segmented bodies resembling a cross between centipedes and chrome sculptures. Behind them floated their commander, distinguished evaluator Vex, whose metallic exoskeleton bore elaborate engravings that seemed to shift and move in the harsh lighting. "Human," Vex's translator rendered the word with clinical detachment, "your species has intrigued us. You expand rapidly, adapt swiftly, and display unusual behavioral patterns. You will be evaluated." Jasmine stood, brushing off her torn uniform. "And if I decline this generous offer?" "Decline?" The translator crackled with what might have been amusement. "You misunderstand. You have already been selected. The only variable is whether you will provide useful data before expiration." The guards moved forward, their limbs producing a sound like wind chimes made of razor blades. Jasmine glanced at her cellmates. Prism had pressed itself against the far wall, while the violet being had condensed into a tight, pulsing sphere. "The testing chambers await," Vex announced. "Your species shows remarkable attachment to other forms of life. Perhaps this will prove advantageous in the trials." As the guards approached, Jasmine's mind raced through her options. Her combat training wouldn't help against these armored giants. But humans had something the Kryvax consistently underestimated: adaptability. "Wait," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Your species values efficiency, correct? Let me propose a deal that serves both our interests." Vex paused, its segments rippling with what might have been curiosity. "You wish to negotiate? Fascinating. Most specimens merely plead." "I'll participate in your trials voluntarily," Jasmine offered, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "No resistance, no escape attempts. In exchange, my cellmates remain unharmed." The violet being uncurled slightly, its pulses quickening. Prism's scales shifted through shades of blue and green, its compound eyes fixed on Jasmine with newfound intensity. "You offer cooperation to protect non-humans?" Vex's translator couldn't quite capture the mix of confusion and interest in its tone. "Your species' behavioral patterns continue to surprise." "Humans are full of surprises," Jasmine replied, allowing herself a small smile. "Consider it your first data point." The guards looked to Vex, their limbs twitching with uncertainty. The distinguished evaluator studied Jasmine for a long moment, its sensory appendages waving slowly. "Agreed," it finally declared. "Though this attachment to lesser species may prove disadvantageous in what is to come." As the guards escorted her from the cell, Jasmine caught one last glimpse of her cellmates. The violet being had stretched out a tendril in what seemed like a farewell gesture, while Prism pressed one scaled hand against the wall, its scales now a deep shade of gold that Jasmine hadn't seen before. She didn't know what trials awaited her in the testing chambers. But she did know this: the Kryvax Empire was about to learn why humanity had survived every challenge Earth had thrown at them. They were about to learn what happened when you backed a human into a corner. And they were about to learn, perhaps too late, that the most dangerous thing in the universe wasn't physical strength or advanced technology, it was a human with something to protect. The doors to the testing chamber loomed ahead, their surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift. As they slid open with a sound like screaming metal, Jasmine squared her shoulders and stepped forward. Let the trials begin. Trial of strength. The testing chamber stretched upward into darkness, its walls gleaming with the same crystalline texture as the cells. Jasmine stood in its center, her boots leaving marks in the strange, powder-like substance that covered the floor. Commence primary trial sequence, Vex's voice echoed through hidden speakers. Subject will face physical evaluation against selected apex predators. Survival probability, 17%. Only 17. Jasmine muttered, scanning her surroundings. I'm almost insulted. A deep rumble shook the chamber. Sections of the floor split apart, revealing rising platforms. On the first stood a creature that seemed to be made entirely of living metal, its body a twisted mass of chrome-like segments that flowed like liquid mercury. First opponent, the forge beast of Nexus Prime, the announcement rang out. Capable of adapting its molecular structure to match any physical threat. Undefeated in 37 trials. The creature moved with horrifying fluidity, its surface rippling as it assessed Jasmine. She backed away slowly, mind racing. Living metal meant it could probably form any weapon, any defense. But everything had a weakness, she just had to find it. The forge beast struck without warning, its body elongating into a spear-like form. Jasmine dove to the side, rolling through the powder that covered the floor. The substance clung to her uniform, and suddenly an idea clicked. Hey, liquid metal, she called out, grabbing handfuls of the powder. Let's see how well you flow with some grit in your gears. The beast lunged again, but this time Jasmine stood her ground. At the last second, she threw the powder directly into its shifting mass. The creature's smooth movement stuttered, its surface becoming rough and irregular where the powder had made contact. Interesting reaction, Jasmine noted, circling her opponent. You can change your shape, but you can't filter out contamination, can you? The beast's next attack was slower, its movements less precise. Jasmine continued to dodge and throw more powder, watching as the creature's liquid grace deteriorated into jerky, uncontrolled motions. Finally, it collapsed into a semi-solid heap, its surface now completely dulled and grainy. Trial 1, Unexpected Resolution, Vex's voice held a note of surprise. Subject demonstrates tactical analysis and resource utilization. Proceeding to secondary challenge. Before Jasmine could catch her breath, another platform rose. This one held what appeared to be a massive web of living electricity, crackling and snapping in the air. Second opponent, the Storm Weaver of Epsilon. Controls electromagnetic forces. 0 survivors in previous encounters. Really? Jasmine sighed. Because the first one wasn't challenging enough? The Storm Weaver surged forward, bolts of energy arcing toward her. Jasmine sprinted away, feeling her hair stand on end as electricity crackled past. But something about the creature's movement caught her attention, it wasn't random. The energy followed distinct patterns, almost like. It's not controlling the electricity, she realized aloud. It is electricity. Following paths of least resistance. The Storm Weaver gathered itself for another attack, its form brightening with deadly power. But Jasmine was already moving, running straight toward the defeated Forge Beast's remains. The metallic creature was still conductive, but the powder coating it provided insulation. Let's test a theory about grounding, she muttered, grabbing a handful of the metallic mass mixed with powder. As the Storm Weaver unleashed its next bolt, Jasmine threw her makeshift weapon directly into its center. The result was spectacular. The powder-coated metal disrupted the creature's electromagnetic cohesion, causing its energy to cascade chaotically. With a sound like thunder imploding, the Storm Weaver dissipated into harmless static. Silence fell in the chamber. Jasmine stood breathing heavily, her uniform singed and covered in metallic powder, but very much alive. Impossible, Vex's voice finally crackled through the speakers. Both trials completed through environmental manipulation and theoretical application. This exceeds all projected outcomes. That's the thing about humans, Jasmine called out, knowing the evaluator was watching. We don't believe in no-win scenarios. We look at the impossible and see a puzzle waiting to be solved. Your species continues to defy conventional analysis, Vex replied. But the final trial approaches. Physical prowess and tactical thinking will not be enough. The chamber's lights dimmed, and a cold wind seemed to sweep through the space. Jasmine felt a presence entering, not physical, but something else. Something that made her instincts scream danger. The mind sculptor awaits, Vex announced. Prepare yourself, human. Your greatest fears are about to become reality. Jasmine squared her shoulders, ignoring her aching muscles and racing heart. She'd survived the physical challenges by thinking outside the box. Now it was time to prove that human mental resilience could be just as formidable. The darkness deepened, and somewhere in its depths, something began to laugh. Trial of mind. The darkness in the chamber took on weight and texture, becoming almost liquid in its density. From its depths emerged a figure that seemed to be made of shadows and starlight, the mind sculptor. Its form shifted constantly, as if unable to decide on a single shape that could contain its consciousness. Third opponent, the mind sculptor of the Void Realm, Vex announced. Specialist in psychological warfare and mental dissolution. Warning, permanent psychological damage likely. Just what every girl wants to hear, Jasmine muttered, but her attempt at humor felt hollow as the creature's presence pressed against her consciousness. The attack began without warning. Jasmine found herself back on her research vessel, but something was wrong. The corridors stretched impossibly long, the lights flickering with sickly intensity. Her crew lay dead at their stations, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and accusation. Your fault, the voices whispered. You left them. You abandoned your post. They died because of you. No, Jasmine gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus. This isn't real. My crew is alive. I made sure they were safe before the Kryvax took me. The scene shifted. She was a child again, watching her father's shuttle explode during a routine maintenance run at the lunar colony. The pain felt as fresh as it had 20 years ago, but something was different. Wait, she thought, even as grief threatened to overwhelm her. That's not how it happened. Dad's accident was on the surface, not in orbit. You're pulling these images from my memories, but you don't understand their context. The mind sculptor's presence wavered slightly. Jasmine pressed her advantage, focusing on the inconsistencies in the visions it created. You can access our fears, our memories, but you don't really understand them, do you? You're just a mirror, reflecting what you find in our minds. The darkness swirled angrily, and new visions assaulted her. Isolation. Abandonment. The vast emptiness of space. But with each attempt, Jasmine found it easier to spot the flaws in the illusions. You know what your problem is, she called out, her voice steady despite the psychological onslaught. You think fear is our weakness. But humans, we've learned to use fear. We've turned it into a tool. The mind sculptor manifested fully now, its form a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes. Its mental attack intensified, showing Jasmine visions of her own death, of torture, of endless suffering. But Jasmine was done being defensive. She opened her mind fully, not to resist the visions, but to share her own. She thought of humanity's history, of every darkness they'd faced and overcome. Of how fear had driven them to create, to explore, to reach for the stars. Let me show you what real fear looks like, she projected the thoughts with all her strength. Fear of staying still. Fear of never knowing what's beyond the next horizon. fear of living a life unchanged. She bombarded the mind sculptor with images of human achievement, cities rising from ashes, diseases conquered, impossible boundaries shattered. Each triumph born from fear transformed into determination. We've looked into the void between stars and said, we can cross that, Jasmine continued, feeling the creature's grip on her mind weakening. We've faced extinction-level events and said, not today. Your kind of fear. It's nothing compared to the fear that drives us forward. The mind sculptor reeled back, its form becoming unstable as it tried to process this unfamiliar concept. Jasmine pressed harder, sharing not just her own memories but the collective memory of her species, their relentless drive to overcome, to adapt, to evolve. You want to know what really terrifies us? She took a step forward as the creature took one back. The thought of never changing. Of never growing. Of remaining static in a universe full of wonders. With a sound like shattering glass, the mind sculptor's form collapsed in on itself. The darkness receded, leaving Jasmine standing alone in the harsh light of the testing chamber. Her body was shaking from the mental exertion, but her mind was clearer than ever. Unprecedented, Vex's voice held a new tone, something that might have been fear. Subject not only resisted psychological dissolution but initiated counter-invasion of the mind sculptor's consciousness. Attempting to process implications. Process this, Jasmine looked directly at the observation panel where she knew Vex was watching. Humans don't just survive your tests. We learn from them. And right now, I'm learning a lot about how your facility works. She gestured to the scattered remains of the forge beast, still coated in conductive powder, and to the lingering static charge in the air from the storm weaver. Want to see what else humans can do when they're backed into a corner? The chamber's lights flickered, and for the first time since her capture, Jasmine smiled. The real test was about to begin, not for her, but for her captors. The uprising. Alarms blared through the testing facility as Jasmine worked quickly, gathering the conductive powder-coated remains of the forge beast. The storm weaver's residual energy still crackled in the air, making her hair stand on end. Security breach in testing chamber Alpha, an automated voice announced. Containment protocols initiated. Let's see how well those protocols handle a little chaos, Jasmine muttered, pressing her hand against the chamber's crystalline wall. Just as she'd suspected, the same energy conduits that powered the facility's barriers ran through the entire structure. She'd learned more during her trials than the Kryvax realized. Each challenge had revealed something about their technology, their systems, their weaknesses. Now it was time to use that knowledge. Distinguished Evaluator Vex, she called out, knowing the observation systems were still active. Remember when I said humans learn from our tests? Here's today's lesson. She thrust the powder-coated metallic mass into the wall's energy conduit. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. Power surged through the facility's systems, overloading barriers and shorting out security measures. In the distance, she could hear the distinctive sound of containment cells powering down. All barriers compromised, the automated system announced. Emergency protocols failing. Specimen containment critical. Jasmine sprinted through the now open chamber doors, navigating the corridors she'd memorized during her transport. The facility was in chaos. Various alien specimens were emerging from their cells, some fearful, others angry, all confused. She skidded around a corner and found herself face to face with her former cellmates. Prism scales were shifting through rapid patterns of red and gold, while the violet being, now fully extended into a floating network of glowing tendrils, pulsed with intense light. Time for a prison break, Jasmine announced. Unless you'd prefer to stay for more of their hospitality. Prism made a series of clicking sounds that her translator rendered as, you disrupted their systems. Impressive. But the Kryvax will respond with force. Counting on it, Jasmine grinned. That's why we're going to need everyone's help. Each species here has different abilities, different strengths. Together, we might just have a chance. The violet being, which she now knew was called a luminarch, rippled its tendrils in what seemed to be agreement. Its glow spread outward, creating a network of light that connected with other escaped specimens, allowing for instantaneous communication. The Kryvax believed us inferior, the luminarch's thoughts translated in her mind. They did not expect cooperation between species. That's their biggest mistake, Jasmine replied, already moving toward the facility's central control hub. They think diversity is weakness. Time to prove them wrong. Groups of escaped specimens began organizing, following Jasmine's lead. A pack of crystalline entities used their bodies to reinforce damaged corridors. Gaseous beings scouted ahead through ventilation systems. Even the more aggressive species seemed to understand the value of working together. Kryvax guards poured into the corridors, their segmented bodies gleaming and weapons charged. But they faced something unprecedented, a coordinated resistance of multiple species, each using their unique abilities in concert. Prism led a group of reflective-skinned beings in creating light-based diversions, while the Luminarcha's network allowed for instant tactical communication. Jasmine coordinated it all, applying human strategic thinking to their diverse capabilities. They're falling back to the control hub, Jasmine announced, watching the Kryvax forces retreat. They'll try to initiate purge protocols. We need to stop them. The hub is heavily fortified, Prism clicked. Even with our combined forces, a direct assault would be costly. Who said anything about direct? Jasmine smiled, a plan forming. The Kryvax think in straight lines. Let's show them some human creativity. She quickly outlined her strategy, using the Luminarcha's network to share it with all their allies. It was risky, complicated, and depended on precise timing, exactly the kind of plan the logically minded Kryvax wouldn't expect. Your species thrives on chaos, the Luminarch observed, its tendrils swirling with curious patterns. We don't thrive on chaos, Jasmine corrected, checking the makeshift weapon she'd constructed from facility components. We thrive on adaptation. Big difference. The assault on the control hub began from multiple directions simultaneously. While energy-based beings created disturbances in the power grid, physical specimens engaged the guards directly. The Luminarcha's network coordinated their movements with unprecedented precision. But these were all distractions. The real attack came from where the Kryvax least expected, through their own security systems. Jasmine had learned enough about their technology to understand its fundamental flaw: it was too perfect, too logical, too predictable. Human, Vex's voice echoed through the facility's speakers, you cannot comprehend the consequences of your actions. Order must be maintained. Order. Jasmine laughed, working her way through the maintenance ducts she'd identified earlier. The universe is chaos, Vex. Life is chaos. The only ones who can't comprehend that are you. She emerged in the control hub's upper level, directly above where Vex and the other evaluators had barricaded themselves. Below, she could see them frantically working at control panels, trying to restore their failing systems. You know what makes humans special, she called down, causing them to whirl in surprise. We don't just adapt to chaos, we weaponize it. The final phase of her plan began. Throughout the facility, every specimen they'd freed acted in perfect, beautiful chaos. The Kryvax's logical systems couldn't handle the unpredictable patterns, the seemingly random actions that served a greater purpose. As alarms blared and systems crashed, Jasmine looked down at her former captors and smiled. Class dismissed. Freedom's price. The control hub of the Kryvax testing facility had become a battlefield of light and shadow. Vex and the other evaluators stood surrounded by failing systems, their segmented bodies reflecting the chaos of emergency lighting. Before them stood Jasmine, backed by an army of former test subjects, each one a testament to the failure of Kryvax superiority. Your species, Vex's translator crackled with static, continues to defy classification. You have corrupted our perfect system. Perfect. Jasmine gestured to the diverse group of beings behind her. You call imprisonment and torture perfect? Your system was never perfect, it was just comfortable. For you. The facility shuddered as another power surge rippled through its infrastructure. Through the Luminarca's network, Jasmine could sense more specimens freeing themselves, joining their improvised rebellion. But she could also sense something else, a growing desperation in the Kryvax's movements. You don't understand what you've done, Vex's segments rippled with agitation. This facility contains specimens too dangerous to release. Some were imprisoned for the safety of entire star systems. Jasmine felt her blood run cold as warning signals began flashing across the hub's remaining functional screens. In their efforts to free everyone, they had released something else, something that made even the Kryvax tremble. The Void Hunters, Prism clicked urgently. They were contained in the lower levels. Ancient predators that consume not just flesh, but consciousness itself. As if in response to Prism's words, an otherworldly shriek echoed through the facility. The sound carried something primal, something that spoke to the deepest survival instincts of every species present. Well, Jasmine straightened her shoulders, mind already racing through possibilities, looks like we need a new plan. Any of you ever hear of an enemy of my enemy? The Kryvax evaluator's sensory appendages waved in confusion, but Jasmine was already moving. She reached for the facility's controls, her fingers flying over interfaces she'd learned to interpret during her captivity. Your species truly is insane, Vex observed, watching her work. You would trust us? After everything? Trust you? No. Jasmine's eyes remained fixed on the controls. But I'm betting your survival instinct is stronger than your pride. Right now, we all face the same threat. So, what's it going to be? Work together or die separately? Another shriek, closer now. Through the Luminarca's network, Jasmine could sense the Void Hunters moving through the lower levels, consuming everything in their path. They were learning, adapting, getting stronger with each consciousness they absorbed. Vex's segments shifted in what might have been resignation. What do you propose, human? You built this facility to test species strengths, Jasmine replied, bringing up facility schematics. Time to put those strengths to use. Every species here has something unique to offer, including the Kryvax. Working together felt strange, former captors and captives united against a greater threat. But there was no time for doubt. Jasmine coordinated their efforts through the Luminarca's network, assigning roles based on each species' abilities. The Kryvax's knowledge of the facility's systems proved crucial. Energy-based beings reinforced power conduits. Crystalline entities created barriers. Even the remains of the Forge Beast and Storm Weaver were repurposed for defense. When the Void Hunters finally reached the upper levels, they found not easy prey, but a unified force. The battle that followed would become legend in a dozen different cultures, the day when the impossible happened, when the boundaries between species dissolved in the face of extinction. Jasmine found herself fighting alongside Vex, human ingenuity complementing Kryvax precision. The Void Hunters were powerful, ancient, and terrifying, but they had never faced anything like this combination of civilizations. Your chaos, Vex observed as they sealed another breach, it has patterns. Purpose. That's what you never understood about humans, Jasmine replied, directing a group of energy beings to reinforce their position. We don't just embrace chaos, we find order within it. Not by imposing control, but by learning to dance with it. The final confrontation came in the facility's core. The remaining Void Hunters, corrupted by the consciousnesses they'd consumed, had evolved into something new, something that threatened to tear reality itself apart. Only one way to end this, Jasmine announced, looking at the facility's power core. We overload it. Create a containment field so strong it'll collapse in on itself. Take them with it. The calculation must be perfect, Vex warned. Too much power, the field collapses too quickly. Too little. Then let's be imperfect together, Jasmine smiled grimly. Kryvak's precision, human intuition, and everyone else's strength. What do you say, want to make history? The plan was insane, beautiful, and exactly the kind of thing that should never have worked. Which, of course, meant it did. The Void Hunters, drawn by the power surge, were caught in a cascade of energy that folded space itself around them. When it was over, when the dust settled and the emergency systems finally fell silent, former captors and captives stood together in the ruins of the testing facility. The barriers between them, physical, psychological, cultural, had been irreversibly changed. Your trials were meant to prove superiority, Jasmine said to Vex as recovery efforts began. Instead, they proved something else, that we're all stronger together than apart. Perhaps, Vex's translator rendered thoughtfully, it is the Kryvaks who failed the test. We sought to classify and control the universe's chaos. You showed us how to learn from it instead. As ships arrived to evacuate the facility, Jasmine looked at the unlikely allies around her, Prism, the Luminarch, even the Kryvaks themselves. Each had contributed something unique, something necessary. So, she smiled, anyone interested in forming an interspecies research coalition? I know some humans who'd love to learn more about all of you. No tests required. The universe, it seemed, had more to teach them all. And this time, they would learn together.